Okay. Hello there. Friends, comrades. Hey there. My name's Dave, he, they. I'm very excited to be here. I have two readings here, two excerpts that we're going to be going through, working on together to help us get a better understanding of nationalism. I've been thinking about nationalism a lot lately. I expect that some of you all also have been. The great and wonderful Abdullah Ocalan, Kurdish freedom fighter and revolutionary, and democratic confederalist, has some very fascinating and I think very elucidating ideas as to what nationalism is, what it looks like, and what it does to people and for people also, though, right? So let's just dig in. This is an excerpt from Abdullah Ocalan's Democratic Nation in chapter 2, right, in Capitalist Modernity, all right? Capitalist modernity has replaced traditional religion and God and constructed in its place the deified nation-state. That's it. That's Abdullah's thesis, and that's my thesis as well. What religion in ages past used to do and what it used to look like is now what the nation-state now and what the ideology of nationalism is today. If we interpret nationalism as the religion of the nation-state, then we can perceive the nation-state to be the God of this religion. The state itself has been constructed in the age of modernity in order to incorporate the essence of medieval and antiquarian conceptualizations of divinity. The state itself has been constructed. So we're putting agency in a different place than we traditionally think, actually. Oftentimes we imagine states as being the norm, states evolving throughout time, existing always. But Abdullah is imagining instead this larger progress of society and a larger progress of the power players, i.e. the capitalist moderns in this case, going on to construct the state, right? We're putting agency in a different place, right? The state is no longer making ideologies. The phenomenon called secular state is the construction of medieval and antiquarian divinities as state either in whole or in essence. So what we call the secular state is in fact only a transmogrification, right, of all of these medieval and antiquarian old-timey divinities, right, of all of these divine, these sacralized figures and entities. Once you scrape off this secular or modern nation-state veneer, you encounter the divine state of antiquity and the medieval age. All that nastiness and blind faithful worship that we've had in ages past. So, we have this general understanding of the nation-state as the God of our religion and nationalism as the religion as a whole. And nationalism, according to Ocalan, evolved from our old forms of faith. In the United States, there is a particular religion, right, and faith that we can look to say that's a little bit more so how we've designed our own state. What I'm thinking of course, is Protestantism. Protestantism? Evangelical? Protestant? Christianity. Holy heck. In Christianity, we have the Holy Trinity. Abdullah Ocalan is pointing at the nation-state and saying, this is the God of your religion of nationalism. I want to expand this here in the United States and say, what is my Holy Trinity? We have the nation-state as our God. What is our Son? Let's understand what the Holy Trinity is in the Protestant faith first, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The three representations of the Supreme, the divine God. Right? Different forms of the same benevolent, all-powerful, omniscient force, right? So we have the nation-state as our God, right? The ultimate God, the highest thing. What is the corporeal representation of this? The Jesus Christe, the Son of this Father. It's our President, of course, right? And all of our elected leaders, what are they but conduits between us and material benefit? They are the conduits between us and the nation-state. They commune with the God that is the nation-state on our behalf. They keep everything running for us. They are the bishops, the cardinals. They are the Pope. And in different degrees of nationalism, we see this worship of the Messiah in different ways. It's more direct. And these hopped up versions of nationalism, these hyped up neo-fascist, Trump fans, they go around and they see Trump quite literally as the Messiah. They say imagine how much he's giving up. Think of everything he's giving up. He's sacrificing himself for us. Think of the job he just gave away, right? Now the Democrats are pestering and harassing him all the time. And he does this all for us, the people, right? All to alleviate the suffering of us. He is our Messiah. But is Joe Biden, is Bernie Sanders, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lesser of a deified figure in our own minds? Or simply a less dangerous deified figure? Right. That's something we may need to understand as well. So these are two of the aspects of our Holy Trinity. Right? And the last is complicated, though. The last is the Spirit. And for any of those faithful folks out there, the Spirit is not an easy part of God to wrap your head around, right? And unfortunately, in my analogy here, it's still not an easy thing to wrap our heads around. The Spirit could be said to be all of the magical enabling power that we imagine the government to have. So in each and every interaction you have, we always are imagining this great permeating, enabling force. I had a history professor that was distinctly a nationalist. I also was previously a nationalist. I used to be a socialist nationalist. Most people you meet are nationalists here in the US. If you voted in 2020, you're a nationalist. To some lesser degree, to some greater degree, maybe if you're a Trumpist and neo-fascist. But to some greater or lesser degree, every government, according to this, is founded on nationalism. Nationalism is the way that we validate this. But again, the Spirit, right? I had a history professor that would basically, he had this moment, he said, government is the most important thing you can possibly ever study. He said, and government's the most important thing you can understand. Because government, unlike anything else, reaches out and touches each and every aspect of our life. Government is what enables each and every societal interaction. His examples were as such. He said, when you go to your 7-Eleven, how is it that you're able to legally purchase with such ease, a nice pack of cigarettes, right? Those interactions are enabled by government. Government is what allowed those cigarettes to be manufactured the way they were. Government is what allowed the cigarettes to be sold to 7-Eleven. Government is what allowed... you see the word choices I'm starting to use here. Government is allowing us to act. According to this understanding, government, the spirit of government, is in fact that enabling force that allows any life to happen, right? And so, again, it permeates all things in between us. It's in the air. We're going to talk a little bit about how and why we validate all this crazy, wacky, spiritual, mystic stuff we were just talking about. Because why the heck would we want any of this? So therefore, capitalist modernity's ideological hegemony. Woo! Diving right back in again. Okay. Capitalist modernity's ideological hegemony. That is, everybody thinks the same frickin' thing about capitalism. Everybody thinks capitalism is good. Right? Ideologically, here in the US, there is a single dominant narrative that capitalism is good, and every media and pop culture outlet you see will reinforce that. Right? It has to. Okay? The ideological hegemony was pointed out more specifically by the likes of Noam Chomsky, right, in Manufactured Consent. That's what we're getting into here, right, with the ideological hegemony of capitalists. Okay, so capitalist modernity's ideological hegemony right, which makes the attainment of maximum profit possible, is what underlies the sacralization of concepts such as the homeland, nation, and market, together with a similar sacralization of nation-state institutions. So we're talking about how things become sacred, right? The market is this great, powerful societal force. This is probably a better example of the spirit that I was talking about. The market is that representation of that. The market is the spirit. That's not what we're getting into, right? The law of maximum profit becomes more legitimate as the concepts related to the nation are recognized by the ideological hegemony and thus validated. Right? Beautiful. In our age, the use of nation-state symbols and fundamental slogans such as one flag, one nation, one language, one homeland, and the expression of national chauvinism generally are ramped up and turned into a ritual at every opportunity, especially at sporting events or in popular media. And should be interpreted as the means of worshiping the religion of nationalism. Right? So all those times putting our hands over our hearts, right? At our football games, right? Jets flying overhead, right? All this fun stuff. These are in fact acts of worship, right? Especially at sporting events or popular media, should be interpreted worshiping the religions of nationalism, right? In fact, the practice of worship in previous ages served the same purpose. The main objective here is to validate the interests of monopolies of power and exploitation, either through concealing or legitimizing them. This is Ocalan's final argument here about why, right? Concealing or legitimizing, right? The whole point is to conceal or legitimize institutionalized or structural hierarchies, right? Unnatural, abusive, and exploitative hierarchies that we see all around us, in the workplace, in government, all over the place, right? At home, many patriarchal instances, because, white supremacist, genocidal American culture is it's not good marital abuse. You still abuse a lot of women in our society. A lot. We fucking abuse women a lot. Right. So now I'm going to jump over into the work by Joseph Tainter. Right. And, actually, no, let me finish my Ocalan. I'm so sorry. All right, we got our background, got a little bit of the meat of those arguments that Ocalan was proposing, and we have that framework that I laid out for us. Right. So now I want us to understand the God of nationalism a little bit better, right? Because we didn't really define our terms. I said we were going to get to it. We're getting to it now. We're getting there. So now we're going to define what the nation state is, okay? Because it's complicated. When you say the word nation, it doesn't mean really anything in popular discourse, except for whatever the person saying is trying to make it mean. That's kind of the whole point, though. Right? So according to Ocalan, right, the nation as a concept comes after entities such as clan and tribe, with kinship in the form of people and nationality, and is a social form that is generally characterized by linguistic or cultural similarities. Pretty easy. Yeah, I agree with this so far. All right. National communities are more inclusionary and have larger capacities than clans and peoples communities, and for this reason, they are human communities with looser ties to one another. Okay. National society is more a phenomenon of our time. If a general definition can be offered, it is a community of those who share a common mindset. And that's it. That's the only general definition that Ocalan could even propose for what a nation is. And it sucks, right? Like, it's not enough. Like, that's not a substantive definition. That doesn't do anything for us. Having a word with such a vague definition, it affects no change in conversation, right? What's the point of having of the nation being so ill-defined, right? And there's reasons to this, okay? So in other words, it's a phenomenon that exists mentally, which therefore means it is an abstract and imagined phenomenon. Again, this is all just a shared common mindset. We're all worshiping this same faith. No? And we can also call this a culturally defined nation. All right? Sociologically speaking, this would be the correct definition. Despite differing in class, gender, color, ethnicity, and even national background, in the most general sense, the formation of a shared mindset and culture is enough to be classified as a nation. So this is an exceedingly broad and effectively useless definition of what a nation is, again. But how the hell else could we define a nation? What the fuck else is a nation? Right? When you ask, when you go up to a horrifically racist neo-fascist and ask them what a nation is, or when you ask them where our nation starts and ends, they won't include illegal immigrants as part of our nation. They won't include unhoused people because they don't provide, right? They aren't productive, right? When you ask a Democrat who is part of the nation, they'll say, anybody within our boundaries, right? Within our state boundaries. But they, again, just don't include unhoused people. They're not productive, the capitalists, and therefore aren't included in our understanding of what a nation is. It changes, it shifts. There's no single, solid, concrete definition of what a nation is, and that's the fucking point. There shouldn't be. If there were, ooh, man, if we knew our enemy, boy, if only. Whew. Ooh, all right, now we're going to dig into a little bit of Joseph Tainter's Collapse of Complex Societies. Right? And why am I going to this? It's because they lay out a pretty good, broad, very cut and dried anthropological definition of what a state is. And I think that's good for us. Gives us the other side of the coin too. It's a lot drier, traditionally styled Western, upper managerial, professional managerial class writing. Right? So I think that this is the other side of the coin. But in fact, as we go through it to understand better what the state is, because now that we know generally what a nation is, share a common mindset, that's it. Now, once we understand what a state is, hopefully, when we marry him, we'll know what the god of our religion is, no? Right, here we go. I think this all seems fair, okay. States are, to begin with, territorially organized. Okay, that is to say, membership is at least partly determined by birth or residence in a territory, rather than by real or fictive kin relationships. So it's not who you're married to, it's not who somebody says you're married to, it's not who you're blood related to, it's where you live, where you were born. The territorial basis both reflects and influences the nature of statehood, right? So a state is a state if it has strong territorial boundaries. But strong territorial boundaries don't exist outside of a state. So with one thing can't exist without the other. They affect each other, and when one thing changes, the other thing changes. That's called a dialectical relationship. But Joseph Tainter has no fucking idea what he's doing with dialectics, so has to say it really weirdly instead of just saying they're dialectical. So states contrast with relatively complex tribal societies in a number of ways. Okay, in states, a ruling authority monopolizes sovereignty and delegates all power. The ruling class tends to be professional and is largely divorced from the bonds of kinship. What does this look like? There's a professional ruling class. Are our politicians working for free? Are our politicians day laborers, essential workers? Are they going out there like you and I, going to the fucking, going to the dispensaries to go to work every day? No. No, they're professionals. They're the ruling class. The ruling class supplies the personnel for government, which is, this is Tainter's very cut and dry definition of what a government is. A specialized decision-making organization with a monopoly of force and with the power to draft for war or work, levy and collect taxes, and decree and enforce laws. This is a critical point of the state. The state necessarily has a government. So when we start to look at the nation state, now we're understanding that the nation is this larger ideological agreement that we may have, and the state, right, is sort of the government side of it. Now we're starting to see how this is starting to look a lot more like fucking religion, huh? Yeah, heck yeah, heck yeah! Woo! The government is legitimately constituted in a state, according to Tainter, okay? Which is to say that a common society-wide ideology exists that serves in part to validate the political organization of society. Oh no, Tainter's getting into the stuff that we're talking about now. Oh no, he's starting to get into mysticism a little bit. This is where things get interesting, and we start to get some more overlap between these two pieces, okay? So, this common society-wide ideology exists that serves to validate the political organization of society. Right? We're going to get into this more. States tend to be overwhelmingly concerned with maintaining their territorial integrity. This is indeed one of their primary characteristics. Okay? States are the only kind of human society amongst like chieftains, tribes, bands, clans, right? All these different forms of human society throughout history that does not undergo short-term cycles of formation and dissolution. By short-term, Tainter means 1 generation, right? 80 to 100 years or so, right? Short-term dissolution. So despite an institutionalized authority structure, an ideological basis, and a monopoly of force, the rulers of states share at least one thing in common with chiefs and big men. Big man is an anthropological term, meaning an ephemeral leader, a leader whose reign is, whose power and legacy is short-lived and dies out when they die, right? It's not a lasting impression made by, but an authoritarian figure of leadership, right? So, the leaders of these states share at least one thing with chiefs and big men, okay? The need to establish and constantly reinforce legitimacy. In complex as well as simpler societies, leadership activities and societal resources must be continuously devoted to this purpose. Hierarchy and complexity are rare in human history. In complex as well as simpler societies, leadership activities and societal resources must be continuously devoted to this purpose. Hierarchy and complexity are rare in human history and where present require constant reinforcement. No societal leader is ever far from the need to validate position and policy. And no hierarchical society can be organized without explicit provision for this need. All right, so this is our resident archaeologist telling us, if you don't have any frickin' darn way of validating your authority, it ain't gonna last long, friend. So we need some sort of way of validating our authority in our state. How are we going to do this, right? Legitimacy is the belief that of the populace and the elites that rule is proper and valid, that the political world is as it should be. It pertains to individual rulers, to decisions, to broad policies, to parties, and to entire forms of government. The support that members are willing to extend to a political system is essential for its survival. Decline in support will not necessarily lead to the fall of a regime, for to a certain extent, coercion can replace commitment to ensure compliance. Coercion. Forcing somebody, argumentum ad baculum, hit him with a stick. Coercion. Coercion, though, is a costly, ineffective strategy, which can never be completely or permanently successful. Even with coercion, decline in popular support below some critical minimum leads infallibly to political failure. Establishing moral validity is a less costly and more effective approach. Yee-hoo! Now we're getting to the good stuff. Complex societies are focused on a center, which may not be located physically where it is literally implied. We're talking about city centers. We're talking about capitals. We're talking about the capital of a state. Okay? All right? May not be located where it is literally implied, but which is the symbolic source of the framework of society. It is not only the location of legal and governmental institutions. Start imagining Washington, D.C. for this, okay? Start imagining Washington, D.C., right? The District of Columbia, literally not even its own state. It's its own separate, deified place. It is our own holy land. It is our Jerusalem. It's not a state. It's not a commonwealth. It's its own little, it's the District of Columbia. It's its own little state. It's special, it's different, and they don't deserve voting rights if they live there. Right? The people, mostly poor black and brown people that live there, besides the politicians and their support cadre, right? So it's the symbol of moral authority and social continuity. That is critical to the capital. Because we all know, right, if you're in a freaking massive war, in World War II, they knew then, and we know now, that when somebody captures your capital, when they capture your flag, the moral authority and the continuity of your society as a whole, of your nation, is now broken. We all know this. We can't point to why, though. We can't say that when the Red Army took Berlin, we can't say, oh, the Third Reich spirit was broken because, but nationalism as a religion, they're taking the holy site, that very representation of your own deity now, that deified site is being taken from you, right? Imagine our DC as our Jerusalem, as our Mecca, no? It is not only the location of legal and governmental institutions, but is the source of order and the symbol of moral authority and social continuity. The center partakes of the nature of the sacred. In this sense, every complex society has an official religion. The moral authority and sacred aura of the center not only are essential in maintaining complex societies, but were crucial in their emergence. That's kind of our understanding what the state is. So according to Ocalan, if we understand what the nation is, it's just a shared common mindset. It's literally just when somebody asks you, hey, what nationality are you? You say, I'm an American. That's literally it. That's all it is. That's what nation is. It's that sharing that common mindset that says, I'm an American. That's it, right? What is the state according to Tainter here, right? The state is more the physical, the material, the boundaries, all these imaginary lines that we draw, but also all of these mystical, the physical, mystical objects and items. It's our tabernacles that we open up and pull our frickin' Declaration of Independence out of, right? And imagine if anything were to ever happen to the Declaration of Independence. Imagine. Does that mean that we would no longer be independent? No, of course not. But what would it mean if it were destroyed? An artifact of such important religious and spiritual significance to each and every American. Imagine, right? This is what we're talking about. So I implore you to start seeing nationalism in more places than just that hyped up, energetic, frenetic nationalism of the neo-fascists, of the right, a hard right, right? And nationalism exists in all its forms, from small to big, from really, productive and forward-thinking to very regressive and reactionary, right? There are distinct forms of nationalism that took place in the Soviet Union. Nationalism exhibits itself most obviously to those adherents directly and worshippers of the president, individual figures, Stalinists, Leninists, Maoists. The way that we worship and understand these figures to be corporeal manifestations of the nation state and of goodness and of godliness. The higher spirit, right? The framework or the sort of historical shape I think that we can see here is just imagine that the Crusades never ended, and that's literally what happened. All right? If we imagine the Crusades didn't end in medieval ages, and the Crusades weren't just to, you know, loot and pillage and rape as much land and as much wealth and extract so much from the Middle East at the time, but now we do this, but it was done in the name of God. We do it now in the name of state, in the name of nation state. Simply doing it in the name of our government, the name of freedom. What is freedom? Ask your politicians. But that's all we have. I think I just really wanted us to start to imagine nationalism again as the religion of the nation state, right? And we can start to see the worship of politicians as that same problematic worship of the infallible deity, of the corporeal Son. We can see the worship of this spirit, that problematic spirit I was talking about, is what we deny most vehemently as anarchists. Because I know confidently for a darn frickin' fact that if government just stopped existing tomorrow, if some kind of magical spell swept over the planet and government stopped existing tomorrow, I know that all of the construction material, I know the construction workers, and I know the roads, all of these things will still be there. I know people are still going to need houses. Yeah, the middleman's not there to set things up. So guess what? The people that need houses are going to go have to ask those construction workers themselves, I understand. The larger point, though, is that we see government as the enabling force, the enabling and life-giving and all-permitting spirit. Right? It's simply problematic to start thinking of things like that. That is perhaps the most nefarious of the elements here, that most hobbles us intellectually, right? But I think that those other representations are also simpler to see as well. The nation state as a whole, in the larger political machinery, right? But also our individual elected leaders. But that's it. That's all I got for y'all. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time.